Hi YouTube, it's Joshua Miles and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about part 2 in the Wayne Adam Ford case. So if you've not watched part 1, you can find it at the top of the description, top pinned comment, and also on screen over here or over here, one of those sides, not sure which. This was a case sent by one of you to me on requestacase.com, which is my website where you can submit your case suggestions and submissions. So if you have any cases you want me to cover, go to requestacase.com. I don't usually do multi-part series, but this case is so mammoth and so huge that I had to break it up for my own sanity and yours. But don't worry, because I will be publishing a video with all the parts put together to make a super mega cut edit version, if that makes sense, like the full documentary version, if that makes sense, which is going to be many hours long. So, and with that being said, let's delve into part 2 of the Wayne Adam Ford case. So we left off where they pulled out a human breast from Wayne's pockets. And when they pulled it out, it was at that point that Wayne told the officers, quote, "Things are so screwed up in my head now, I just want help." The officers then asked Wayne to stand up, which he complied with, before asking through floods of tears whether he could hug his older brother Rodney, which the officers agreed to let him do. The two brothers cried as they hugged. The officers then asked Wayne to turn around before placing him into handcuffs and walking him out of the lobby across the street to the jail. Rodney was asked by Sergeant Michael Thomas to stick around in the lobby so they could ask him some more questions. And both officers would later testify that Wayne had been arrested on suspicion of aggravated mayhem, the unlawful removal of a human part. What they hadn't let Wayne or Rodney know was that as soon as they saw the human breast, they had immediately linked it to the case of Patricia Ann Tarmes. The detectives now had to find the answers to all the questions that had sprung from Wayne handing himself in. Who was Wayne? Why had he done this? And had there been any more victims? Wayne Adam Ford was born on the 3rd of December 1961 in Petaluma, Northern California, to parents Karen and Jean. He was the youngest of 2 born to the couple. Wayne's mother had been German and was born in January of 1942 as Karen Bridget Danziger. Karen was described as not having that nurturing gene that most mothers have, and some believe this was on part due to the rocky relationship she had with her real mother. As Karen was growing up, she would move between Germany and the United States as she was traded between her grandmother and her mother. Wayne's father, on the other hand, Calvin Eugene Ford, known as just Gene, was born in March of 1938 in Missouri to parents Merle and Myrtle Ford. Gene would grow up in Northeast California, which was where his father worked in the lumber mills. When Gene was about to turn 18 years old in 1956, he and his friends decided to enlist in the army. Gene's entrance exam results had been so good, amongst the top 1%, that he was actually selected to go into intelligence work, which involved the interception of global radio signals. The year after enlisting in 1957, when Gene had been stationed at Herzog Base in Herzogenaurach, Germany, excuse my German pronunciation, it was there that he met Karen Bridget Danziger. Karen had been 16 years old when she had met Gene at a birthday party on the base shortly after she had moved back to Germany from Texas. Gene had been 4 years older than Karen, and they dated for about a year and a half. They'd often sneak away to the village where Karen's grandmother lived, which Karen would later claim was due to the fact that her mother didn't approve of her relationship with Gene, though Gene would later state that he never got that impression. Karen's relationship with her mother had been rocky at the best of times, as she found her to have been overbearing. Quote, "I was wanting to kill her. I'd thought about it because I was so desperate to get away, but it didn't go very far. You know what kept me from pursuing the thought was I didn't want to go to jail." Karen's desperation to escape her mother led her to create a plan of action. She could escape her if she got married to Gene. And so Karen announced that she wanted to marry Gene one day when he had been over, to which her mother immediately shot her down and stated that there would be no such marriage. Karen retorted by declaring that she'd just have to get pregnant, then they would have to get married. When Gene would later be asked about this conversation, he would say that he didn't remember it and that it was likely that the conversation between Karen and her mother had been in German. Gene had always believed that Karen's parents had wanted them to get married. Karen would later state that it had been at this moment that she felt something snap inside of her, and so she went into the bathroom and ingested a large number of her mother's pills. Quote, "I swallowed them and went into the bathroom and lay down, waited to die, and after some time they missed me. They came in and I was already out, so they called the ambulance and took me, pumped my stomach, and kept me there for 2 or 3 days." Interestingly, according to Gene, Karen hadn't stayed overnight in the hospital. According According to him, the doctor had advised him to walk Karen around the family's apartment on the base for hours until the drugs had worked their way out of her system. Karen would later claim that this had been the only time that she'd attempted to end her own life. Jean, on the other hand, would later state that Karen's parents had told him that this had been her second suicide attempt, with the first attempt having happened when Jean had been back in the United States and Karen had been scared that he would not return. Now, Karen and Jean would eventually get married, and unbeknownst to the couple, Karen had actually been 2 months pregnant with Rodney when she'd gotten married. Rodney would then be born in Nuremberg on the 26th of March 1960. After the birth of Rodney, Karen claims that she would start taking birth control as she didn't want to get pregnant again, though one weekend, Karen had been off the pill when Jean had been playing in a football game out of town. Karen had dropped Rodney off to stay with Jean's grandmother so that she could join Jean in a hotel, which is a bit wild to me. She just dropped off her child so that she could just spend the night with her husband like that. It's a bit, I could not imagine being that grandmother. Anyway. The couple then allegedly got into another argument that night about sex. Karen would later claim that Jean had raped her that night. It's important to note that Karen never spoke of this alleged rape until years later. It was after this intercourse that Karen found herself to be pregnant for a second time, this time with Wayne. After Wayne was born, and when Wayne had still been young but not too young to not understand the implications of it, Karen told him that he'd been the product of rape, and this caused immeasurable damage. When Jean would later be told of the accusation brought against him by Karen, he denied it. Now, Karen suddenly found herself at 19 years old with 2 children and with a failed relationship with her husband. She felt that she had been far too tied down to ever be able to get a divorce from Jean. Karen had also been determined to not love her new baby Wayne due to the circumstances in which he had been conceived, though according to Karen, Wayne had been such a good baby that she'd been unable to resent him. It's important to note, for the sake of understanding the dynamic that Wayne had with his mother, that she would later state that she had never been one to show love for her children. Allegedly, Karen had been far more focused on her own loneliness and dealing with her own mental health struggles than showing affection to her children. According to Jean, Karen would touch the boys in a not very loving way. When she changed their clothes, she would apparently be pretty rough with them. Now, it's important to establish that Jean's family had no idea that there had been marital problems going on. As Wayne and Rodney grew up, they shared a bedroom with bunk beds. They had been close as brothers. Each of the boys' relationship with their mother Karen had been different, with Wayne seemingly always trying to get his mother's approval. When Karen would count to 3, by the time she got to 1, Wayne would have already completed whatever Karen had asked him to do. Rodney, on the other hand, would wait until the very last second to make a move. When it came to Jean's parenting style, he had been more physical with them. He would sometimes punish Rodney and Wayne using a belt. According to Karen, Jean didn't punish the boys physically often, but sometimes he did hit them too hard, which would, quote, leave welts on their shoulders. Karen would apparently leave the discipline of the boys to Jean, telling them, quote, just wait till your dad gets home, as a threat for any unsavory behavior. And according to Rodney and Wayne, it had been Rodney that had taken the brunt of Jean's discipline. Although Rodney and Wayne had been close, they were still very competitive, as most brothers are with each other. Though what's very abnormal is that Wayne would later tell a psychologist that Jean would make him and Rodney put on boxing gloves and, quote, duke it out when they had disagreements or arguments. Rodney was described as being more social than Wayne was, with Rodney enjoying playing with the other neighborhood kids outside as Wayne stayed back at the house with his mother and playing in the sandbox with his toys. Rodney was described as being, quote, even-keeled, whereas Wayne was described as having emotional highs and lows, just like his mother Karen, a child that held on to his feelings and had been unable to let things go. Now, due to the fact that Jean works intelligence, he was sent all over the world on different assignments. He would sometimes spend up to a year away from Karen and their children, leaving Karen to raise the boys on her own. It had been on one of these assignments when Jean was told that he had to go to Okinawa that he realized that he had one more chance to make his failing marriage work. Jean sat down with Karen and discussed their future. He wanted his family to come with him to Okinawa, but Karen was very resistant. She didn't want to go. Karen was so resistant to going to Okinawa that she threatened Jean with divorce if he made her go. Allegedly, Karen claims that Jean told her he'd take the boys away from her if she left him. She would later quote Jean as saying, quote, I'll turn into an alcoholic and I'll just do away with myself. It was at this point that Karen stopped talking about leaving Jean, which made Karen, quote, miserable. She was adamant, however, that her children didn't grow up without their father. And as it turned out, the entire family did in fact end up going to Okinawa for a couple of years. Rodney and Wayne attended elementary school there in the late 1960s. According to Karen, her life there had been very difficult, and she felt as if she'd been on the cusp of a nervous breakdown the entire time. She would beg Jean, quote, send me back to the States. I want to go back to the States. I can't do it anymore. Karen's mental health continued to rapidly decline, ultimately becoming so devastating to her that she felt she had no no other choice but to end it. It had been Rodney at the age of 8 years old who had one morning come downstairs into the kitchen to find his mother Karen sitting in a pool of her own blood with wounds on her wrists. Karen had told Rodney that she'd accidentally cut herself on the lid of a can, but Rodney was clever, and even at 8 years old, he understood what his mother had done, and he didn't believe the story that she told him. Quote, "I was smart enough to know it wasn't an accident." According to Rodney, the paramedics would take Karen away and to the military hospital by the time his younger brother Wayne had woken up. Many years later, a forensic psychiatrist would classify Karen's teenage incident of swallowing the pills after her mother had forbade her from marrying Gene as an act of suicidal gesture, and this incident, this act in her kitchen, as a genuine suicide attempt. Karen would ultimately get her way. According to her, she'd get to go home after she spoke to Gene's commander about her need to go home. According to Gene, though, it had been him who had sent Karen back home after one of his men had broken down to him and told him that he'd been having an affair with her. When Karen returned to the United States, she brought the children to Eureka, California. It was there that she proceeded to have an affair with Gene's 15-year-old brother Billy, but actually still been living with his parents, Karen's parents-in-law. A personal note, not only does this affair when she gets back to the States give credence to Gene's account that she had an affair with one of his men, which was why he'd sent her back to the States, but it's also downright disgusting. She was a grown woman having an affair with not just her husband's younger brother, but a 16-year-old. When Gene came back to the United States during a break from his assignments, Karen told him about the affair she'd had with his younger brother. Gene reacted by buying a house in Santa Rosa, which was 220 miles away from Eureka and from Billy. And after doing so, he had to go back to Okinawa to finish his assignment there. Though, not long after going back, in 1969, Gene was discharged from the army as a staff sergeant. A key event in the relationship between Karen and Gene that greatly impacted both Rodney and Wayne had occurred in the middle of the night at about 2 a.m. when both the boys had been asleep. Gene and Karen had another argument about sex, and the story of what actually happened that night is vastly different depending on whether you speak to Karen or whether you speak to Gene. The true story of what occurred is hidden somewhere between both accounts, so keep that in mind. It's also important to state that we know Karen's retelling of events to be inaccurate at the best of times, so it's difficult to know whether she's telling the truth or not. Let's take a look at what Karen recounts of that night. According to Karen, she had always kept a .38 caliber Magnum gun in the house as a means of protection, though she had always been careful to ensure that the bullets were kept in a separate location as to prevent her children from accidentally finding the weapon, playing with it, and potentially hurting themselves or others. Basic gun safety requirements. Now, Karen claims that it had been that night when Gene had gotten the gun out and allegedly said, quote, "If I can't have you, nobody is going to." A struggle then ensued with Karen trying to wrestle the gun away, but she was unsuccessful. And so Karen ran to grab the bullets that were kept separately so that she could hide them. However, Gene managed to get to the bullets first. Karen was allegedly so frightened that Gene would kill her, Rodney, and Wayne, and then himself, that she ended up fleeing next door to ask him to call for the police. And when Karen returned to the family home, she wasn't sure if the gun had been loaded. She apparently called out to Gene, quote, "Don't do this." It had been at that point that the police had pulled up to their home. Karen then allegedly told the police that she'd been divorcing Gene and that they needed to take him now. She didn't want him in the house. According to Karen, the authorities then took Gene away, and when he came back a few days later, he spoke to Karen and told her something that would forever stick with her, quote, "You won." Now, Gene's version of events of that night had been different. When he heard Karen's account of what happened, he said that it had just been another one of Karen's fantasies. Gene had apparently bought that gun for Rodney to use once he was old enough to be responsible. He confirmed that he did keep the bullets separately from the gun and implied that Karen largely had absolutely nothing to do with the firearm. Gene would state that it had been in an argument towards the end of their marriage when Karen had given the firearm to their next door neighbor and told this neighbor that she was afraid that Gene would try to hurt her or somebody else. Apparently, Gene and Karen would have sex one more time at her encouragement, but it didn't help fix any of their issues. They would talk about it over breakfast the next morning, quote, "It's not working, is it?" Karen said to Gene, quote, "No, it's not working." Quote, "How about 30 days? Is that enough time for you to clean up your affairs and leave?" "How about today?" Gene replied. According to Rodney, Karen had broken the news in the hallway that morning by telling them that his father and her were getting divorced. Both Rodney and Gene stated that the police never went to the house that day. It's unclear if Wayne remembered the events or how he felt exactly about it. What we do know was that Wayne had been a shy guy who had difficulty expressing his emotions in a positive and healthy way. Instead of dealing with emotions properly, he would throw what was described as temper tantrums, leave class, or even skip school in its entirety. Wayne was described as not understanding how to go about talking to girls. He would get put off when girls would tease him, as he was unsure whether they actually liked him or not. Karen didn't take steps to course correct Wayne's behavior. She never spoke to Wayne about why he acted in that way, and apparently she just simply had no ability to communicate with her children or really anybody about private, intimate things. Karen would show no emotion towards her children. She wouldn't hug them, or if one of them got hurt, she would simply try to talk them through it. As Rodney and Wayne became teenagers, Karen could tell that Jean had favored Rodney over Wayne, and Wayne had noticed that favoritism too. Jean would later state that he and Rodney had been closer in many ways due to the fact that they had been so much more alike, but he also said that he tried to pay more attention to Wayne in order to not hurt his feelings. Rodney, on the other hand, always felt that Wayne got more attention and would often call Wayne a quote mama's boy. It was clear that both Jean and Karen had difficulty balancing the attention and needs of their children, and it would seem that everything had quickly become too much for Karen. When Wayne had been 12 years old, he called up his father Jean in tears and asked his dad to come pick him up and asked him whether he could live with him. Jean told Wayne that of course he could come and live with him, and then asked him whether Wayne wanted him to come and get him. Wayne told Jean that he wanted him to go and fetch him right now. Jean asked what he meant, and Wayne replied, quote, "Well, I'm on the porch with my bag. She threw me out." Jean was quick to speak to Karen about what had happened to have caused her to throw her youngest child out of the house in such a manner, to which she told him, quote, "I just can't control him anymore. I don't want him around me." Rodney found himself forced to stay behind with his mother in order to try to ease the tensions between family members, though it wasn't long before Karen kicked him out too. Rodney had been 14 years old when he had come home one night to find the front door locked. He asked his mother to let him in, to which she said, quote, "Nope, you're not getting back in this house." Rodney would later state that Karen had told him that he was uncontrollable and that, quote, "I was just like my dad and she wasn't going to have me around anymore." Rodney, Wayne, and Jean would all later state that they had always felt that Karen had abandoned her sons, though Karen would be amazed by this accusation when she was told about it, as if she had a totally different idea as to what had happened. Interestingly, Rodney didn't contact Jean after being kicked out and instead went to live with a few of the families in the neighborhood. He had only spent a couple nights each in each location before he had moved on to the next. It wasn't long before Jean had learned that his eldest child had also been kicked out and was sofa surfing, and so he decided that Rodney should come live with him too. This didn't go down well with Wayne, who started acting out as he had no longer been the sole focus of his father's attention. Jean had set the expectation that both Wayne and Rodney would have to help out with his construction projects when they came home from school, and Jean had been quite strict with the boys. If they didn't do as they were told, he would come down on them hard. Both Wayne and Rodney handled this pressure differently, with Rodney actually enjoying learning all he could while Wayne struggled. You see, Wayne found it hard to do what his father and his teachers wanted from him whilst also trying to take care of his own needs at the same time, and Jean had been at a loss as to how to best handle Wayne, so much so that he ended up approaching his friend called Keith, who he told about Wayne shutting down. Jean asked Keith whether he could speak to Wayne to see what he could do to help the situation. When Keith went to go speak with Wayne, he found him in his bedroom with his shades drawn, surrounded by his clothes, school books, and papers, while rubbing his feet. Keith asked Wayne what had been going on, to which Wayne replied that his feet hurt. Quote, "When he took his socks off, his feet were covered with open sores that had become infected. He said it had been months since his last shower or even a change of socks." After some conversation, Keith asked Wayne whether he'd like to move into his house for the summer, to which Wayne agreed. Quote, "He went to work with me most days, he got stronger and things were looking good. At the end of the summer, he went back to his dad's." According to Jean, Wayne had been fine up until Jean had met a new woman, who Jean would actually go on to marry in 1976. And apparently, Wayne did not like Jean's new wife or his new sister. It's unclear how often Wayne went between his mother and father and uncle, but what we do know is at the age of 15, Wayne went off on his own to Reading. What's interesting is that Karen remembered Wayne's upbringing differently. Apparently, he had issues with some of his teachers, with one of his teachers saying that Wayne seemed to be angry and that he had been taking it out on them by being aggressive. When Karen had tried to speak to Wayne about this, he'd completely denied that there had been a problem and refused to talk about it any further. According to Karen, one day, Wayne had just come home and told her that he wanted to go live with his dad. When Karen asked why, Wayne said his dad could teach him how to fly and that they could work construction together. Apparently, Karen had thought this over for a few days before permitting Wayne to go live with Jane. A few months after doing so, Karen had allegedly received a phone call from Jean in which he was complaining about issues he had been having with Wayne. Quote, "He called me and said there was some problem with Wayne having broken into his store and there was a gun involved and he was pretty angry with Wayne. And he said, you know, he's an idiot, blah, blah, blah." Now, after that incident, Jean was apparently able to work out an informal agreement with some friends in the police department so that Wayne could wash police cruisers every day after school for 6 weeks as a punishment. Though soon after, Wayne stole a car and went joyriding, which saw his punishment extended by 4 weeks. Apparently, Apparently, according to Jean, Wayne would not only wash the cruisers, but also rewire them so that they didn't work properly. According to Karen, Wayne had called her to say that he wanted to go back and live with her as he had been upset with his father. Wayne claims that Jean had promised to pay him for his work, but he didn't, and so Wayne felt used. Wayne did go on to move back to live with Karen, his mother, but apparently went all downhill very quickly. He started staying out late, forcing Karen and her boyfriend at the time to drive around looking for him so that he wouldn't get caught out breaking curfew. And Wayne wouldn't tell anyone where he'd been. He grew more and more confident and defiant. One day, one of Wayne's teachers, who had been pregnant at the time, called Karen to tell her that Wayne had hit her. The teacher told Karen that she needed to get Wayne some form of counselling, with this assault seeing Wayne get a week-long suspension. Wayne refused to see a counsellor. All of this tension came to a head when Wayne grabbed Karen in the garage during an argument over his behaviour, and it had been during this incident that Karen first felt scared of her own son. Karen ended up contacting a lawyer for advice on how to manage her seemingly out-of-control son, who told Karen that so long as Wayne had been living in her home, she would be legally responsible for his actions. At some point shortly thereafter, Wayne would go to live with his uncle in Eureka. Karen would state that she doesn't remember whose idea the move had been. Wayne's uncle would remember Wayne as being a loner. He would later describe him as always being so deep in thought that he could be somewhat uncommunicative, and that Wayne would have mood swings and get very upset at times. Wayne would tell his uncle that neither of his parents loved him and that, quote, nobody cared for him at all. Wayne's uncle would actually go on to buy him a motorcycle, which Wayne ended up taking his anger out on. Quote, he'd beat it up, physically kick and beat the motorcycle because it wouldn't start. Something that stuck out to Wayne's uncle had been the fact that Wayne's relationship to punishment had been unusual. On one occasion, Wayne had decided to run away and so ran off north, though he ended up turning around once he reached Arcata. Instead of going straight back to his uncle's house, he actually went to juvenile hall. Quote, they wanted to know why he's turning himself in. He says, well, I was trying to run away, and then I had to go up and get him out of the juvenile hall and bring him home. He wanted punishment because he had the thought of running away, and he felt that he needed to be punished for that. On another occasion, Wayne's uncle and his wife had been away for several days, and when they had returned, Wayne's uncle could sense that something had not quite been right with his Camaro. Wayne, his uncle, and his aunt had all been sitting around the house when Wayne had broken into tears and confessed that he'd actually taken the car. The following day, the doorbell rang, and on the other side had been a police officer with Wayne on the doorstep. You see, the police officer had caught Wayne trying to steal a battery from another car to put in the Camaro, as he'd accidentally killed the battery in the Camaro by leaving the lights on. Quote, he couldn't handle doing something wrong and not being punished for it. He had a strong sense of justice, even today, about things. When Wayne had been aged 16, Jean had called Karen to complain that he'd been upset with Wayne, at least according to Karen. Quote, we decided maybe the best thing for him would be to go into the military to get him off the streets and get some discipline. If you asked Wayne about it, he would claim that he got the idea to join the US Marines after seeing The Boys in Company C, though as he'd still been a minor, he needed parental consent. Wayne would ask his dad to sign the consent forms, and apparently Jean had been ecstatic. According to Rodney, Wayne lied about his age to the recruiters, and nobody actually noticed as he had been big for his age. Wayne had just turned 17 years old when he had entered boot camp in January of 1979, and would be the Marines that would train Wayne to become a killing machine. It had been a year after Wayne had joined the Marines, around Halloween of 1980, when Wayne had met a woman called Kelly Dick on a blind date. The blind date had been set up by one of Wayne's co-workers, and Kelly Dick, who likes the macho silent type, was instantly attracted to Wayne. Wayne had come across as standoffish and indifferent at first, going a week without calling and claiming that he had forgotten Kelly Dick's number. He'd do that only to walk 15 miles from Marine Corps Air Station El Taro in order to see her. And this all meant that Kelly Dick couldn't quite figure him out. It kept her interested. It had been in late November while they were on their way back from dinner when Wayne and Kelly Dick saw a two-car accident take place at the side of the highway. Wayne asked Kelly Dick to stop the car so that he could check in to see if anyone had been injured. Somebody had been injured in the crash, and so Wayne told Kelly Dick to go and try and find a payphone so that they could call for an ambulance. Though when Kelly Dick returned back 20 minutes later, Wayne had been nowhere to be seen. There was an ocean of fire trucks, police cars, and rescue workers, but no Wayne. Kelly Dick asked a firefighter if they'd seen Wayne, but they said that they hadn't. They did ask Kelly Dick if she'd seen the third car, which she said that she hadn't. She presumed that this third car had been the car that she'd been in, but the firefighters told her that it hadn't been her car, it had been a red car. It wasn't until later that Kelly Dick learnt that the firefighters had been talking about a red car that a drunk driver had been operating that had swerved off the highway, hitting Wayne and another person and catapulting them almost 40 foot down the embankment. Kelly Dick would end up driving around until 3 a.m. looking for Wayne, even tracing the route he would have taken if he'd walked back to the base. It hadn't been until the following morning, when she'd been talking to a friend, when one of her roommates called her to say that Tustin Community Hospital had phoned to say that Wayne had been in the hospital. When Kelly Dick visited Wayne in the hospital, she saw that he looked as if he had landed right on his face, which had swollen to twice its normal size. Wayne's face had been black and blue around the eyes, most of his lip had been ripped off, which required stitches to be fixed. His front 4 teeth had been shattered, his jaw broken, but he had been conscious. When Kelly Dick visited Wayne again the following morning, Wayne's mother Karen had been at his bedside. You see, Karen had been living in Santa Rosa when she'd received a phone call from an ICU nurse, quote, "We have your son here, and if you can come, it would be a good idea because he's been in a serious accident. He has serious head damage." Wayne had been conscious when his mother had arrived. Karen would only stay for a couple of days, ultimately leaving Kelly Dick to look after Wayne for the remainder of his 9-day stay. Rodney would later say that Karen had called him and told him, quote, "You need to come and see your brother. I don't know if he's going to make it." It's interesting to note that both Rodney and Karen would later state that neither of them felt the need to go to the hospital and spend much time there, as Wayne's commanding officer had told Jean that Wayne's injuries hadn't been that serious and that he knocked out a couple of his teeth, and that was about it. According to them, neither of them actually knew just how severe Wayne's injuries had been until much later on. When Wayne would later speak about this incident, he would tell a psychologist that he'd been pressing his hand against the wounded driver's neck to stop the bleeding when he was thrown down the embankment. Quote, "Yeah, they revived me. I woke up 3 days later. The whole one side of my body just didn't work very good and my head was all swollen up, and it was a pretty tough time." Due to the severity of his injuries, Wayne was not able to go back to work right away. And as Kelly Dick's roommates had gone home for the holidays, she offered to let Wayne stay with her so that she could nurse him back to health. Over the course of the next week or so, the couple grew closer and closer, and once he felt better, they flew to Northern California to visit Wayne's mother Karen, Rodney, and a few other relatives. Kelly Dick and Wayne would then drive back in a 1953 Chevy that he'd bought from Rodney. Kelly Dick had noticed at the time that there had been a change in Wayne's behavior following the accident, though to her, he seemed to be more friendly and he seemed to pay her more attention. As February of the following year came around, Wayne had returned to work and he was ordered to undergo a couple of months training in Alabama. Wayne spoke to Kelly Dick about this, and then he told her that if they were to get married, then he'd be able to get a bigger salary, and so they decided that they would quietly get married. The couple decided that they would get hitched now, and so in the May, Kelly Dick and Wayne silently got married in Las Vegas. Though the couple's plan to keep it quiet fell through when Kelly Dick's sister found out about it and told Kelly Dick's mother. About 2 weeks into the new marriage, Kelly Dick began to notice another change in Wayne's behavior. You see, Kelly Dick and Wayne had been talking over some wine when Kelly had asked him about what his family had been like and what it was like for him growing up. And it was from that conversation that Kelly Dick got the feeling that Wayne hadn't been treated well in his childhood. Though when she pressed for more information, Wayne clammed up and made it clear he didn't want to talk about it. And when Kelly didn't stop pushing, Wayne got physical. Quote, "He wasn't actually aiming for me, he was just trying to swing at me to tell me to shut up, and he ended up hitting a stud in the wall and broke the knuckles in his right hand. It just shattered all the knuckles. So he ended up going to Alabama with a cast on his hand." It became clear that something had changed in Wayne's personality after the wedding, being described as becoming more, quote, demanding and domineering. It also became clear that his attitude towards his new wife Kelly had changed too, and not for the better. Wayne had moved to Alabama to undergo his training, and while he had been there, he had called Kelly and ranted to her that the money that she'd sent to him hadn't arrived in time. Kelly had then been upset to learn that Wayne had pawned his wedding ring in order to go out and drink beer with his friends. It's unclear if it had been at this same point, but around this same time, Kelly had discovered that she had been pregnant with Wayne's child. And when she told Wayne, he was very upset. He traveled back home to speak to Kelly. Quote, "He basically told me that he wasn't about to have kids right now, and I had to have an abortion. I told him I didn't want to have an abortion, and he said, well, I'm leaving then. And I felt like I had no choice." Despite Kelly's objections, she was made to go to an abortion clinic, and it was there that she was asked by a member of staff if anybody had been forcing her to undergo the procedure. She was informed that if she says somebody was forcing her, then they wouldn't be able to proceed. And it was at that point that she walked out of the interview room, past Wayne, who'd been waiting in the waiting room, and into the hall where she burst into tears. Wayne followed Kelly into the hall and asked her what happened. She told him that she didn't want to go through with this. It was then that Wayne grabbed Kelly by the arms and shoved her back towards the waiting room, saying, quote, "Get back in there." Kelly Dick would proceed with the abortion, and afterwards Wayne became allegedly abusive towards her, telling her that the only reason he married her, quote, "was for a steady piece of ass." Wayne's relationship with sex was messed up, to put it lightly. He started having sex at the age of 15 and had slept with 8 women before Kelly, most of those women having what he would later describe to be large breasts. And Wayne had a very weird relationship with consent. And by that, I mean that he didn't have a relationship with it. Whenever Kelly didn't want to have sex, he wouldn't take no for an answer and kept on at Kelly for hours and hours until she, quote, gave in. Apparently keeping on at Kelly until 4 a.m. before she would relent. And after a while, even giving in to Wayne started to not be enough. Quote, "It was like my whole life at home had to do with sex. If I was a nymphomaniac, it might have been a great situation for me, but I'm personally not that sexually motivated." Wayne would make Kelly be naked around the house. Quote, "If Kelly Dick sat to watch TV, he would feel free to come up and start sucking on a breast. I mean, it was just a constant barrage of this. Like, that's all I was there for, that I was an object for his pleasure." Whenever the couple went out together, Wayne would make Kelly wear shirts that had been so see-through that she might have well not been wearing one at all. And this sexual torment would get so bad for Kelly that she would start crying at her desk at 5 p.m. at the end of the workday as she knew she had to go home to it. And at home, Wayne expected Kelly to cook elaborate 3-course dinners in the nude. Wayne wouldn't accept any plain vegetables in his meals, and they all had to be drenched in cheese sauce. Kelly Dick would go home for the summer as she had school, then they would go ahead and have a proper wedding in the fall. In January of 1982, Wayne had decided to go on a trip to Big Bear with some of his friends from the Marines. He'd asked Kelly if she could go, but she couldn't, and so he had gone without her. 2 days after Wayne had left, one of his friends had called up Kelly. This friend asked her if Wayne had called her, to which Kelly said that he hadn't, before the friend told her that if he did call her, tell him to come back. Naturally, Kelly wanted to know what the hell was going on, but the friend said that he couldn't tell her and just reiterated that if Wayne called, tell him to go back. Now, when Kelly had received this call, she'd been playing cribbage with a friend of hers who had been gay, and when he overheard this conversation, this friend had been so scared that he fled the apartment just in case Wayne showed up. It wouldn't be until around 11 p.m. when Wayne would finally call Kelly, and he told her a story that simply left her amazed. Amazed that Wayne believed he'd done absolutely nothing wrong, and amazed that he hadn't been the slightest bit embarrassed to tell her what he'd done. Wayne told Kelly that he and his friends had been roller skating when they'd met 2 young girls, who they'd invited over to the cabin the next day. Wayne explained to Kelly that they had slipped off their wedding rings and engaged in oral sex with the girls, who turned out to have been 15 years old. After they had finished, Wayne's friend tried to take the girls home when they had stopped to help a young guy whose car had broken down. And as it turned out, that young guy had been the boyfriend of the 15-year-old girl that Wayne had been with. This 15-year-old girl immediately jumped out of the car and screamed that she'd been raped, according to Wayne. By the time the police had gone to the men's cabin, Wayne had ran out of the back door. He'd run 10 or 15 miles before he came across a payphone, which he then used to call Kelly. Now, it's important to note that Wayne was eventually arrested for attempted rape. An arraignment date was set, but it kept on getting postponed. Kelly would later describe how this judicial process went on for 6 to 8 months. And interestingly, Wayne's record says only this about the case, quote, "Victim unavailable, decline prosecution," and whatever records there may have been about it no longer publicly exist. In April of that same year, 1982, Wayne and Kelly had both moved to Santa Ana, which was where Wayne had landed a job managing their new apartment complex, and Kelly had got a job working in a warehouse with about 30 men. It had been at this point that Wayne had changed his mind about what Kelly should wear out of the house, and he made her wear baggy clothes when she left for work. It had also been at this point when Wayne had started to get Kelly to agree to bondage during sex. When the couple had visited Hollywood, they had stopped at a sex shop where Wayne had bought a deck of cards which depicted women in various positions, though the cards focused on the breasts, which had been wrapped up or tied up. Wayne had gotten the idea that Kelly should imitate these poses during sex, making her dip her breasts in wax so that he could make molds of them. Wayne had even told Kelly that he wanted to cut holes in a sheet, then cover her up so that only her breasts were exposed. A lot more of this kinky activity went on, some a lot more extreme that I won't discuss in this coverage just out of respect for Kelly, but what I will state is Kelly had not been into this kinky activity. On the 13th of January 1983, Kelly had been ironing when everything came to a head for her. She told Wayne that she wanted to get a divorce, and unnervingly, Wayne didn't seem to be that angry with that. Wayne asked her if she would mind staying living with him until he found somebody else, and Kelly tried to suppress the fear that had come on by this calmness that was just coming from Wayne. She told Wayne that it wouldn't work well if she stayed, and so the couple discussed splitting up the furniture, the car, and their 2 motorcycles. Wayne's calmness had remained up until the point when Kelly told him that she wanted to keep her bike. Wayne asked her why, to which Kelly said that she had friends that ride, and it was at that point that Wayne exploded, dragging Kelly to the phone and demanding that she call her friends. And so Kelly did, and she rang up her friend Bob, who had been her co-worker and confidant. Wayne invited Bob to meet them for breakfast at a restaurant that had been just down the street in about 45 minutes, to which Bob agreed to do. Kelly went to get changed out of her pajamas, and Wayne followed her into the bedroom. It was there that Wayne raped her, leaving bruises on her back and wrists. He then told her to go get dressed, and the pair then walked down the street to the restaurant to meet Bob. At the restaurant, Kelly sat in silence as Wayne asked Bob if he knew any girls that he could introduce him to, preferably, quotes, ones with large breasts. Quotes, Bob's just like flabbergasted. He's sitting there like, well, gee, I don't know, Wayne. I don't know of anybody offhand, but I'll keep my eye out. After they had finished the breakfast, Bob turned to Kelly and told her to drive his car to her house, pack her things, and that he'll take her away. And Kelly did just that. Bob then took a stroll with Wayne, as he had assumed that Wayne had called him to breakfast to fight with him. He asked Wayne if he wanted to fight, to which Wayne said that he didn't want to and that he was happy for him. Bob was confused by this, and his confusion got worse as they walked back to the house in which Kelly had already packed a bag. Wayne did nothing as Kelly left with Bob. A few days later, Wayne moved out of the property, but he didn't stop harassing and calling Kelly, who had moved to Pasadena. A couple of weeks after this incident, Bob and Kelly began dating and had properly moved in together, and Wayne had started stalking Kelly. Every day he would call Kelly and report that he'd seen her driving down a certain street, kissing Bob at a particular traffic light, or having dinner. Kelly and Bob eventually moved to Cathedral City, which had been near Palm Springs, to get away from Wayne. When Wayne couldn't find Kelly's new address, he started to harass her sister for it. Kelly then began the divorce proceedings with the hope that Wayne wouldn't fight her move to finalize the divorce in 6 months, which was around fall of 1983. But Wayne would still not let go of Kelly. He even showed up at her grandparents' ranch in Chino in 1985, telling her uncle that he'd been an officer for the Norco Police Department, which is not even a real police department, and had asked to use the phone to report a car accident that he'd witnessed. He then tried to get Kelly's address, but her relatives pretended that they had no idea where she lived. Kelly would describe Wayne as being extremely narcissistic. Quotes, he did not, from my view, comprehend that there are moral rights and moral wrongs, as long as it felt good to him. When Wayne had gotten married to Kelly and been in the Marines, he hadn't seen his brother Rodney all too much. Rodney had joined the Navy in 1983 and had stayed in service until 1990. When Wayne and Rodney had finally spent time together following Wayne's separation from Kelly, he had noticed that Wayne had been acting aggressively and self-destructively. Quote, he'd come unglued, throw a fit, leave. If it wasn't his way, it wasn't going to happen. At the time, Wayne had told Rodney that he'd been driving very fast on his motorcycle when he missed a turn and hit a guardrail. He also told Rodney that he had wiped out while doing a wheelie several months later. When Rodney would later learn more about Wayne's head injury from 1980, he attributed these incidents, along with Wayne's increasingly aggressive behavior and hair-trigger temper, to that. Before the accident, Rodney would claim Wayne had gone four-wheeling and had rode his motorcycle, but always within safe, reasonable limits. Several months after Wayne and Kelly had separated, at 7:30 p.m. on the 8th of April 1983, Wayne was admitted to the Naval Hospital's psychiatric ward in Long Beach, where he was sent from the Marine base in El Toro after complaining of depression and problems adjusting to work. He blamed it all on his separation from Kelly. Wayne had stated on intake that he had no significant health issues other than when he was in the hospital in November of 1980 when, quote, I was run over on the freeway. Wayne checks every box available for emotional difficulties: anxiety, tension, restless, depression, irritability, etc. During his intake interview, Wayne told a nurse that he had been seeking treatment for depression and low self-esteem. He told the nurse that he'd been happy until he was 7 years old and his parents got a divorce. A drug test screening was conducted on the 9th of April, which showed Wayne to have no recreational or prescription drugs in his system. On the 10th of April, it was noted in his records by a nurse that Wayne had been passive-aggressive, and the doctor's summary stated that Wayne had a, quote, recent history of alcohol abuse, past history of explosiveness, mental exam revealed an angry Caucasian man in fatigues, patient stabilized quickly on ward without meds. The doctor recommended that Wayne be returned to full duty, but that he should follow up with outpatient group therapy. Wayne was subsequently discharged on the morning of the 11th of April, and there was no record of him going through with any additional group therapy. In May of 1984, Wayne was seen by another psychiatrist as an outpatient at the El Toro base. This psychiatrist diagnosed him with adjustment reaction with mixed features and a personality disorder with explosive and immature features. Wayne was returned once again to full duty. On the 27th of September, Wayne was found sitting in in, quote, a catatonic-like state in his barracks. Apparently, even as he was being removed from the area, he refused to speak. He was taken to the hospital on the base where, during a physical examination, Wayne became violent and ran out. Wayne was then forcibly returned to the hospital where he became so agitated that he had to be placed in 4-point restraints in a locked room and given shots of a psychotropic drug called Haldol. On the 29th of September, Wayne denies that he had tried to hurt himself or hospital staff before, but he did acknowledge that this had been his second psychiatric admission. During this admission, Wayne asked if this could affect his chances of becoming an attorney before expressing his desire to go to law school. Wayne didn't understand why he'd been placed on suicide watch. The following day, on the 30th of September, Wayne began to exhibit paranoia. He had asked a nurse, quote, "Do you put anything in the food here before we eat it?" Only once the nurse reassured Wayne that they didn't put anything in his food did he actually eat all of his meals. By the 2nd of October, Wayne had been back with the rest of the patients and had been in a better mood, doing sit-ups and push-ups by the afternoon. One of the nurses had noted that Wayne's talk of becoming a lawyer seemed to have been rather grandiose, given the situation, and wrote in his treatment plan that he should be encouraged to verbalize his feelings, quote, but towards a more realistic goal. 90 minutes after those notes, another nurse wrote that Wayne had started exhibiting the potential to harm himself or others, and had become abusive, quote, "I've been hearing gossip that I'm trying to seduce a 16-year-old girl. If anybody tries to accuse me of that, I'll break their fucking head." 6.5 hours later, Wayne was noted to have become cheerful, happy, and optimistic about his future again. On the 3rd of October, Wayne said that he'd been feeling some pain and hurt for the teenage girl as he knew what she'd been going through. The following day, on the 4th of October, Wayne had seemed upset in his group therapy and was having trouble controlling his anxiety. One of the nurses noted that Wayne had complained that the staff had been trying to, quote, control his mind and that we, the staff, were out to get him. The notes went on to say, quote, reassured patient that no one was here to hurt him. Received feedback from female patient who assured him that the staff weren't controlling anyone's minds or out to hurt anyone. Wayne had sworn that he hadn't harmed anybody as he became more and more agitated, quote, go ahead, give me the shot. You can't hurt me physically. That's what you're doing now, hurting me physically. Wayne was given medication, though he refused another dose of it, which saw him placed into seclusion. There, he refused to eat or speak and just began singing, praying, and pacing. Wayne was eventually placed in 4-point restraints before being given more Haldol. After 5 days of enduring medication and restraints, Wayne was noted to no longer be aggressive, though he had become depressed and tearful. By the time the 7th of October came around, Wayne had been noted to have been more cooperative. The staff subsequently reduced his restraints to just 2, and he would then be released from seclusion the following afternoon. He had become appreciative with a brighter and more alert mood. The next day, on the 9th of October, Wayne began to express anxiety about his future again, quote, now I won't be able to work where I want because of my hospitalization. Wayne was diagnosed by the doctor as having borderline personality disorder, quote, severe and chronic. The doctor further noted that he appeared to have recovered from the episode of, quote, acute decompensation. In the early hours of the following morning, at about 4 a.m, Wayne would call his uncle Jimmy up and tell him that he was coming home. After Wayne had spent 3.5 weeks in the Okinawa hospital, he was flown by medical plane to Letterman Army Hospital, which is located in Presidio in San Francisco. He was supposed to go to San Diego, but ended up in San Francisco, quote, due to an apparent lack of inpatient beds in Southern California. Wayne finally arrived at Letterman on the 21st of October, though his medical records had been lost in transit. Let's take a look at what the admitting doctor's initial impressions of Wayne had been. Quote, no evidence of a psychotic disorder presently. The etiology of this problem is unclear. An underlying personality disorder is likely, though uncertain. Before Wayne could be discharged from Letterman, he would receive a different diagnosis. Diagnosis, borderline personality disorder. Severe as manifested by intense and inappropriate anger and lack of control of anger, marks in shift in mood from normal to depression, irritability, and anxiety. Depression when alone and a chronic feeling of emptiness or boredom. Atypical psychosis manifested by frequent psychotic breaks, unmarked by hallucinations, or a fixed delusional system, not caused by mind-altering drug. Ruled out schizophrenia, ruled out paranoid disorder. Wayne would then be transferred to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in Oakland on the 23rd of October, where he'd stay for 2 days, before being transferred to the Naval Hospital in San Diego on the 25th, and the doctors had still not received Wayne's medical records. In the intake interview, Wayne explained that he had been hospitalized in Okinawa because he, quote, was working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, without breaks, and so I broke. Wayne further reported that he'd been admitted to the Long Beach Naval Hospital in 1983 for, quote, quote, homicidal ideations. Two doctors, Dr. Faust Jr. and Dr. Ford, were on Wayne's case, and they noted their impressions of him. They noted that Wayne appeared to have not been a, quote, reliable historian about himself. Dr. Ford had stated that he has, quote, serious doubts that the head trauma that Wayne had endured in 1980 had been a contributing factor towards his current psychiatric issues. Quote, he describes his mother as a very religious person who later went to India to live and work with Mother Teresa. He left his mother to live with his father because the grass is always greener. He lived with his father for 1 year, after which time his father gave him his own apartment to live in at the age of 13. The patient states that he became a juvenile delinquent, engaging in car theft, burglary, and truancy. He was arrested at least twice and spent some period of time in juvenile hall on detention. At the age of 15, he bought a car and travelled around the country. He was then taken in by a woman of middle age and lived with her until the age of 17, when he joined the US Marine Corps, worked in electronics and did poorly, and then became a truck driver, which he quickly became bored with. He became interested in NBC, liked it, and became the model Marine. He quickly progressed in rank to sergeant. He did well until his wife abandoned him for another man in 1982. Dr. Faust had written that Wayne's aggression and manipulation of fellow patients supported the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Quote, he appears to have recovered fully from his previously decompensated and psychotic state, and further hospitalization does not appear warranted at this time. Dr. Faust concluded by stating that Wayne had not been in any mental condition to continue his service in the Marines, and so on the 31st of January 1985, Wayne was discharged from the military for, quote, the convenience of the government, character, and behavior disorders. Following being kicked out of the military, Wayne found work driving delivery trucks for Sears and Wards, and had lived with his uncle Jimmy. His uncle had also managed to get him a job repairing boats at a fishery in Eureka. It had been dirty work, but it had paid good money. But it had been far too dirty for Wayne, who soon quit the job and moved to Southern California. Quote, Wayne always had the attitude that he was better, not than anybody else. Well, he did have a very high opinion of himself for some reason, and that type of work was beneath him. It had been at around the same time that Wayne had started calling himself by his middle name, Adam, just as his mother had done. Though it must be noted that we will continue to address him using his first name Wayne in order to avoid any confusion. In 1986, Wayne found work as a driver's helper, which entailed loading trucks at American Delivery Service in Garden Grove. And it had been there that Wayne would meet a girl by the name of Wadad Radwan. Wadad had been in her late teens and had worked in the customer service office. Wayne asked Wadad out for a coffee one day, and from there, their relationship progressed. Now, Wayne never held down any job for very long. He worked a multitude of jobs, including delivering papers for the Orange County Register, selling cars at 2 dealerships, working at a motorcycle shop, driving a school bus for disabled children in San Capistrano, and working as a tow truck driver and security guard. Wayne's relationship with Wadad would last about 6 years and had been very off and on. It was plagued with breakups, stints of living together, and even an engagement. They hadn't been dating long when they had gotten into a massive argument that saw them split up for a couple of weeks. Wayne would then move in with his friends they had met in the Marines, then move back in with Wadad when they'd made up, then back in with his friend again, then back with Wadad. It was a vicious and continuous cycle. Wadad, on the other hand, would live with her mother whenever the relationship was on the rocks. She simply just wanted Wayne to be happy. Though, just like in his relationship with Kelly, Wayne's sexual practices with Wadad started off normally. He initially asked for oral sex, but Wadad declined. Quote, I can't do something like that if I don't love you. This did upset Wayne at the time, but he didn't take it out on her. And it hadn't been long before Wadad fell in love with Wayne. Wadad then became more and more willing to do what she needed to do in order to please Wayne. This would include letting him put a safety pin in her nipple during sex. Despite the pain, Wadad would allow Wayne to do this on 4 separate occasions. Wayne never pushed it all the way through, just pricking her with it. And he would later tell a psychologist that he'd administered diabetic injections to one of his teenage girlfriends, and over time, the needles had become sexually arousing to him. A major difference between the sexual relationship with Wadad and Kelly had been that Wayne never forced Wadad to have sex when she didn't want to. Much later, a woman by the name of Janice Hawkins would disclose to the authorities that she had met Wayne at a karaoke bar in Vallejo in October of 1987. According to Janice, Wayne had actually lived with her for a time, and she would engage in a sexual relationship with him. Wayne would ask Janice to pinch his nipples so hard she feared she would pinch them off. Janice also disclosed that Wayne had hit her once while they were having sex, and that Wayne had allegedly masturbated in front of her teenage daughter. In 1989, Wayne and Wadad had been living together in a 2-bedroom house in San Clemente, and they had both been aware that their relationship was not destined to last, and that they hadn't been good for one another. And so they decided the best thing to do would be to break up. It was then that Wayne had the strange idea, quote, why don't we just break up slowly? I'll sleep in the other bedroom. And this was an idea that Wadad went along with. Wayne moved into the other bedroom and they lived together just like roommates would do, though they had been intimate on occasion. This arrangement lasted about a year as Wayne had supposedly been trying to find somewhere else to live. Wadad had told him that she wanted to keep the house as she had a dog. It had been at around this same time period that Wayne had told his older brother Rodney that he'd enrolled in pre-law courses at Saddleback College. He had dreams of one day becoming a criminal defense attorney. It's unclear what his progress had been with those classes. One day, Wayne came back to the home that he'd shared with Wadad crying and refused to tell Wadad what had been wrong. Eventually, Wayne explains that he had been walking along the pavement when he'd come across a girl, grabbed her purse and threw it on the roof and bit her breast. Wadad was very confused and couldn't understand why Wayne would do that, but she didn't push him for any explanation as he had already been crying. Wadad would later state that other strange things would happen at around the same time too. While Wayne had been working as a tow truck driver and helping people on the road, one night, a young teenage couple from out of state had come up to him and told him that they had no money, that they needed to buy some fuel. Wayne actually brought this couple back to the house where they sat around the kitchen table playing cards. Wadad ended up coming home one day to find Wayne sitting at an angle and facing the girl who'd been about 15 years old. Wayne had been shirtless and wearing cut-off shorts with no underwear, and so his testicles had been hanging out of the bottom. Wadad tried to signal to Wayne to cover himself, but he remained oblivious, up until Wadad decided to say something to him. She felt that Wayne had been disrespectful, though she would later realize that Wayne had likely enjoyed watching a 15-year-old girl react to his exposed genitals. Finally, after a year of, quote, looking for a place, Wayne finally announced that he'd found somewhere to live. Wadad asked him where his new place is, and that's when he pointed to the house next door. Wadad was understandably outraged, and she quickly realized that she would have to move somewhere to get away from Wayne. And so she managed to find a studio flat in San Clemente, and unfortunately, Wadad had to leave her dog behind. After Wadad moved, Wayne had started going out a lot to karaoke bars and drinking a lot. The pair continued to be intimate every now and then up until the end of 1982, which had been when Wayne told Wadad that he'd slept with somebody else, and that was a hard stop for Wadad. Quote, I told him I didn't want any part of him after that. In March of 1993, Wayne called up Rodney and told him that he'd been arrested on suspicion of firing a weapon and for cruelty to animals. Wayne told Rodney over the phone that two Dobermans that belonged to next door had been barking constantly and had been trying to get under the fence between their two properties. Wayne alleged that the Dobermans were trying to get a hold of Wadad's dog. He explained that he'd repeatedly warned the owner of the two dogs about what he would do if the dogs got into his yard. Quote, you need to fix the fence. If they get in here and hurt my dog, I'm going to kill them. Sadly, one of the dogs did get through the fence and ended up in a fight with Wadad's dog. Wayne initially tried to separate them, but he'd been unable to, and so went inside, grabbed his shotgun, and killed the Doberman. Wayne would be sentenced to 5 days in jail for cruelty to animals, though it must be noted that it's unclear whether or not he served any time. When Wadad would reflect on the relationship she had with Wayne, she was shocked at why she'd stayed in the relationship. Quote, I think I was just waiting for him to make the right move in his life, but he never did it. I waited till I was 26 and I woke up that morning on my birthday and thought, what am I doing here? She'd go on to say, quote, I don't think he respects women, period. Wadad speculated that Wayne had acted the way he had due to his relationship with his mother. According to Wadad, Wayne had told her that he'd been very close to his mother Karen, hanging on her dress in the kitchen as a child. And then one day, quote, she just looked at him and said, I don't want to be your mother anymore. And she left. She just left. Rodney would later agree with Wadad's opinion of Wayne, quote, something happened when he got kicked out of the house by our mother. He didn't trust women anymore. And that's as far as I can see when he started having problems with women. Rodney would also describe Wadad as a very nice person, one of the best people that he had ever met, and that she'd always gotten on well with Rodney's wife, so much so that the four of them used to go to car shows together. Quote, we just loved her to death. Wadad was the best and healthiest thing that ever happened to my brother. Wayne would later look back on his time with Wadad and describe her as the love of his life. In early 1994, Wayne had been employed as a disc jockey for a Japanese sushi restaurant and bar in San Clemente. One of Wayne's friends at the time, a man called Dave, had been dating a 21-year-old woman by the name of Elizabeth, though the relationship between Dave and Elizabeth hadn't been destined to last, with the couple breaking up with each other after only a few months. After that breakup, Elizabeth began going to the bar in order to see Wayne. At the end of May of 1994, Wayne and Elizabeth began dating one another, getting close very quickly. After just a few months, the couple had been living together. Before long, they had started talking about getting married, something they were both set on. As those discussions of marriage evolved, the couple had something more pressing on hand to deal with, and that was that Elizabeth had been pregnant. Wayne and Elizabeth discussed with each other whether they should keep the baby, with Wayne leaving the decision about the abortion to Elizabeth due to the fact that they hadn't been married yet, and Elizabeth subsequently decided to go through with the procedure. The wedding plans progressed thereafter, and on the 15th of October 1994, Wayne and Elizabeth got married at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas, with Wayne's best man being Rodney. Interestingly, before the ceremony, Rodney had actually expressed how he felt about the marriage to Wayne, apparently with Elizabeth's brother and father, who works for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, in the room. Rodney told Wayne, quote, "You shouldn't marry her. She's too young. She's too volatile. You've already had problems and I don't see it getting any better." Now, Wayne didn't heed Rodney's warnings and still got married to Elizabeth despite them. Not long after the wedding, on the request of Elizabeth, Wayne stopped working at the Japanese sushi restaurant and bar, as it hadn't been the kind of, quote, scene to be working in when you're married. Despite quitting his job there, the newlyweds would frequent the bar still. One day, the couple had been talking with each other about their pasts, and curious about Wayne's time in the Marines, Elizabeth asked him whether he had ever killed anyone. Wayne responded by saying that he hadn't, but that one night in 1992, he had hurt a girl, quote, pretty badly, in a bar in San Clemente. He told Elizabeth that somebody had jumped on his back while he had been at the bar, and so he turned around and out of instinct, quote, decked the person. It was only after doing so that he had realized that the person that he had, quote, decked had been a young Latina woman whose jaw was now dangling due to the punch. He claims that he had immediately ran out of the bar and driven off in his red Jeep, which he had repainted to blue, as according to him, the girl had been part of a Mexican gang and he didn't want her, quote, fellow gangsters to track him down by his car and get revenge. Now, just like in Wayne's previous relationships, it had not been long until Wayne had wanted to start exploring more in their sex life. And not long after the wedding, Wayne told Elizabeth that he wanted to watch her have sex with another man. Initially, Elizabeth refused his request, but she actually ended up changing her mind after he argued with her, making her life a living hell. Quote, I can't even put it into words. It would just make life so bad that I thought, if this will make him happy, and it's stupid on my part, you know I've made some mistakes in my life. And I just thought maybe it would get our life back to normal. Elizabeth simply wanted to make her husband happy and hoped to get past this fantasy of his. And so one night, Elizabeth got drunk enough to numb her feelings, and then Wayne and Elizabeth picked up a Marine from a bus stop and went back to the barracks. There, the three of them had sex, but, quote, the men didn't touch each other. The morning after, Wayne had been very proud of Elizabeth. She looked at him and told him that she never wanted to do it ever again, though she would do it 2 more times. And each time, Wayne's afterglow would only last for about a week. It all came to a head after the final time when Elizabeth told him she couldn't do it again. Quote, it's awful. I don't know why you would want to do that to me. Wayne would respond, quote, well, don't you want to make me happy? And making Wayne happy had been something that Elizabeth had found hard to do. If he didn't get 8 hours of sleep, he would blame Elizabeth and then refuse to go to work. Elizabeth would end up sleeping on the couch for most of the time. By March of 1995, Elizabeth found herself pregnant again. And during this pregnancy, Elizabeth found it difficult to have much appetite until the evening. One morning in August of 1995, she found herself to have been unusually hungry, and so she made herself some egg, bacon and toast. She then settled in on the sofa to eat her breakfast while she watched some TV, but Wayne decided that he wanted to eat the food that she'd made rather than cook for himself. He also wanted to have sex. Quote, what he expected of me as a wife was to cook his breakfast and cook his lunch and cook his dinner. If he had to go to work without his breakfast, he was pissed at me, whether or not I was sick. But this time round, Wayne's anger came out a different way. Quote, he just took control of me and he raped me. It was bad. I didn't want anything to do with him. I just wanted him away from me, and he took a belt and wrapped it around my neck and told me to suck his dick. And I wanted to bite it off, but I didn't want to get killed or anything. That was the only time I was really frightened of him. He hit me with the belt, he got on top of me, and I felt like I was going to die. Elizabeth ran out of the apartment naked, screaming, and into the laundry room, which was where she grabbed a towel and covered herself up. Wayne got scared and demanded her come back inside and told her it would be okay, to which Elizabeth refused to do so. It was then that she looked around and saw a young boy had been watching her, and so she went back into the apartment as she didn't want to cause a scene. Elizabeth then took a shower and let Wayne have sex with her. She lay there lifeless, letting him do what he wanted, hoping it would make things better, and afterwards she cried. After all of that took place, on that same day, Wayne and Elizabeth drove up to Pomona to see Rodney, his wife and his kids, so that they could all go to a classic car show. They acted as if nothing had happened. Other than this instance of rape, Wayne had never been violent with Elizabeth, even when she'd hit him during an argument. Wayne had been happy about the baby and the pregnancy once he found out that the baby had been a boy. Elizabeth would later state that she didn't know what they would have done if the baby turned out to be a girl. When Elizabeth went into labor and had to go to hospital, Wayne seemed to have been very put out that he also had to go along with her. And so on the 10th of December 1995, Wayne and Elizabeth welcomed their son Max into the world. Not long after Max was born, the family moved to Las Vegas in order to pursue better job opportunities. The young family moved in February of 1996 and stayed with Elizabeth's mother until they could get their own apartment in the same complex the following month. Once Wayne and Elizabeth had been alone again, Wayne started asking Elizabeth to talk to him about becoming a sex worker. As Elizabeth had never been a sex worker, she didn't understand Wayne's new sex game and refused to tell him what he wanted to hear. Wayne ended up finding work as an apprentice for the electricians union, but he then decided that he'd rather drive a cab. Meanwhile, Elizabeth stayed in their two-bedroom apartment looking after Max. She kept the house clean, did the laundry, and cooked for Wayne just as he wanted. Elizabeth began to detach from herself emotionally as the sex games progressed. On one occasion, Elizabeth let Wayne tie her wrists together, but she said she wouldn't do it again as she didn't like feeling confined. And on several occasions, Wayne had put his hands around Elizabeth's neck as he was reaching climax. As the marriage progressed, Wayne became more and more unhappy. He was described as being constantly depressed, holding on to things and not letting them go. Wayne started to make Elizabeth drink vodka straight from the bottle until she threw up. Wayne even then began talking about placing a padlock on Elizabeth's vagina so that no one else could get inside, and then started asking whether he could pierce Elizabeth's breasts with safety pins. Elizabeth figured that if she let Wayne do it once, then he'd be satisfied and move on. But Wayne wasn't satisfied with just the once, and so she would continue to let him use the safety pins on her just for a minute. Quote, "That really hurts. I don't want to go through with this. Why would you want to do this to me? I don't like it." It quickly became clear that this behavior had been something Wayne needed, and it was something that Elizabeth couldn't withstand. On top of that, Elizabeth strongly disliked the way in which Wayne would be constantly pleasuring himself on the couch, especially when she caught him in the act. This all came to a head in June of 1996 when Elizabeth decided that she couldn't take it anymore, and so she moved with the baby Max upstairs to her mother's apartment, which had been in the same complex, for a week just to get a break. When Elizabeth moved upstairs, Wayne began to plead with her and promised that things would be different. Little did Wayne know that Elizabeth had been working on herself and building her confidence. This led Elizabeth to give Wayne an ultimatum, and so he had 2 weeks to prove he could change. Quote, "The way you live is not right, and I am going to work." Elizabeth also told him that he wasn't going to be given his meals on the table whenever he wanted them, as she had other things to do. Quote, "I don't know what's wrong with you, but I'm not going to live like this." And Wayne tried to meet Elizabeth's demands for a day or two, but once he had seen that Elizabeth had been serious about working and not being his domestic slave, he went back to acting depressed. On the 4th of July 1996, Wayne and Elizabeth went to a party at the top of the Stratosphere Hotel and Casino, and 2 days later, on the 6th of July 1996, Elizabeth left Wayne for good. She moved in with her mother as she didn't have enough money for a deposit on her own apartment. And on the following month, Elizabeth met a man and went to stay at his place in Green Valley, though Elizabeth's father didn't approve of this new living arrangement. And so, in October of 1996, Elizabeth and Max moved in with Elizabeth's father. By that point, Wayne had Rodney and Jean pick him up in a motorhome and take him back to California, towing his broken down Jeep behind them. Wayne then lived with his father in Napa for a few months before he moved down to South California. He'd been in Vallejo at the Blue Rock Inn, where Wayne had found work at a karaoke company that he met another woman, and this woman and Wayne soon began dating. And after a couple of months, Wayne moved into her trailer. While they were living together, Wayne told this woman that his ex-wife, quote, destroyed their family when she left him for another man. Wayne talks about wanting to kill Elizabeth and often told her, quote, "I know I'm going to hell," but he didn't elaborate. Wayne lived with this woman until he moved to his grandmother's house in Eureka in September of 1997, which is when he went long distance with the woman he'd been dating. One night in January of 1998, the woman's nephew got, quote, pretty wasted with Wayne on rum and coke, and Wayne told this nephew that he, quote, hated women, that his wife took his kid away from him, and that he wanted to cut them up, dismember them, and hide everything that would identify them. This nephew would later state that he had been intoxicated at the time, so he wasn't sure if Wayne had been talking about what he wanted to do to women, or if he had been confessing to something he'd already done. Whatever the case, the nephew told his aunt that Wayne was evil, and that she should stop seeing him. The woman did end up ending the relationship with Wayne during a visit to Eureka the following month, when Wayne told her that he was in love with her 20-year-old daughter, and that he wanted to have a child with her. 2 months later, Wayne showed up at the woman's trailer and argued with her, and after that, she never heard from Wayne again. Sometime after splitting up with Elizabeth, Wayne started calling his mother Karen, who was now going by her new married name. You see, Karen had moved back and forth to India before eventually settling in Austin, Texas. Wayne would always call his mother late at night. The first phone conversation had gone like this, quote, I'm sorry, Mum. I'm calling you so late. It doesn't matter. I'm glad you called. How are you and what are you doing? Over the course of the next 90 minutes, Wayne and his mother, Karen, cried together as they talked about Wayne's feelings, that his mother didn't love him and that she had, quote, deserted him. Karen told Wayne that she loved him and apologized for not showing it more. Wayne responded by saying that she abandoned him. Karen told Wayne that it had been him that had wanted to leave and that she didn't want him to leave. Wayne later told Karen about how lonely he was and how people had been hurting him. Quote, whenever I open my heart, whenever I'm honest with people, whenever I more or less reach out to them, they stab me. Karen could see that Wayne had been beating himself up, but she didn't want to say anything that could push him away from their reconnection. She couldn't help but wonder whether Wayne had been having some kind of psychological breakdown, and so she asked Wayne whether he wanted to come and stay for a few days, but he told her that he couldn't. She then told him that he could call her collect again anytime. Karen would try calling Wayne, but nobody ever answered. It was several more months before Karen would hear from Wayne again, but this time the call had come in between midnight and 1 a.m. and Wayne had been crying. He told Karen that he was angry that people were persecuting him, but he refused to elaborate any further. Wayne also complained to his mum that he was lonely without a girlfriend, to which Karen told him that he just needed to get back out there and make some friends. In December of 1996, Wayne traveled to Las Vegas with some relatives to see his son Max for his birthday. You see, Wayne had been proud that he shared a birthday with his son in the same week, and so Wayne had bought his son Max a tricycle with a big helmet. It must be noted that Max had only been a year old and could barely walk. Elizabeth had felt torn. When she called Wayne to encourage him to be more involved in his son's life, all he wanted to do was talk about getting back together. Wayne had always blamed Elizabeth for his not being in Max's life, reminding her that she was the one that had left. Quote, so he frickin' moves to California and makes it completely impossible to have a normal relationship. Now, at some point in 1997, Wayne had called up Elizabeth and had told her that he was going to Las Vegas to see Max. Wayne and Elizabeth came up with a plan for Elizabeth to drop Max off at the child care center where Wayne could spend some supervised time with his son. Elizabeth had always feared that Wayne might kidnap their son. Elizabeth had hoped that she would avoid bumping into Wayne, but he had been there when she'd arrived with Max. And so she suggested that they go get something to eat at a nearby McDonald's while Max got used to being around and being with his father. Wayne began to tear up as they sat in the restaurant. Quote, I just miss you. Elizabeth didn't want to get into it, and since Max seemed fine with Wayne, she told him to go ahead and take Max for the day and then drop him off later at childcare. Later on, Elizabeth went for sushi with her boyfriend, then called the childcare center to make sure that Wayne had already been and gone. She asked them if Wayne had dropped Max off, and they told her that he had, but Max didn't want to stay, so Wayne was still there. Eventually, Wayne left Max inside, but he sat in his car outside for a while. On the 14th of October 1997, Elizabeth and Max met up with Wayne so that Wayne and Max could have a visit mediated by Wayne's friends, Scott and Linda Hayes. The three of them took a trip with the Hayes family to a pumpkin patch where they spent the afternoon, and where Wayne and Max went on a half-hour stroll along the shoreline. Scott thought that Wayne appeared excited to see his son, and that although Wayne had been cordial to Elizabeth, he could see Wayne's lingering disappointment about the separation. Wayne had also told Scott that he hadn't been happy that Elizabeth had shaved Max's head bald. Wayne left in a mood after the 6-hour visit with the family he'd lost. Nobody would know just how much the visit had upset him until it came out more than a year later that afterwards he went on to brutally murder and dismember the woman known as Torso Girl to the local investigators. Wayne had worked 3 days a week at a cement and gravel mining plant on the Mad River, 7 miles north of Eureka, and on Halloween night of 1997, a handful of days after the Torso Girl was discovered, Wayne had been having dinner with his family, and the topic of the Torso Girl case had come up in conversation due to it being discussed heavily in the media, and one of his aunts had asked who would do such a thing. One of his family members would later recall that Wayne simply said nothing and just looked down at his dinner plate. As we know, 25 days later, on the 25th of November 1997, Karen Mitchell would go missing and be connected to the Torso Girl case. And on the 5th of December 1997, Wayne would walk into a mental health clinic in Eureka. During the intake interview, Wayne said that he'd suffered from severe depression for most of his life and described his crying spells, thoughts of suicide, multiple aches and pains, and feelings of hopelessness and agitation and recurrent insomnia. In his medical notes, it was noted that when Wayne would become depressed, he would abruptly leave his job and that he had problems maintaining relationships. Quote, patient had been using alcohol more, binge while he was singing in bars. Wayne said that he drank half a beer every few weeks and that he'd been obsessively focusing on his thoughts, which disrupted his sleep and judgment. To the staff, Wayne came across as negative and sad, describing activities that were clearly doomed to fail. It's important to note that Wayne never once mentioned killing or wanting to kill anybody. Wayne was subsequently diagnosed with dysthymia, a low low-grade depression that could possibly be more serious. With histrionic, displays exaggerated emotional responses, dependent, allows other people to meet his needs, and narcissistic, uses other people as objects to meet his needs features. He was then referred for psychiatric evaluation, but after the staff psychiatrist spoke with Wayne, he decided that Wayne should undergo counseling before trying medication. And so Wayne made an appointment for counseling on the 18th of December 1997, but he never showed up. In early 1998, Wayne got a job at Edeline Trucking and was assigned truck number 60, which had a 45-foot flatbed for transporting freight, and he started driving that night. Wayne didn't own a car, and so he essentially lived in the sleeper portion of the cab, driving over to the trailer park to do his laundry. On the 15th of April 1998, Wayne and Elizabeth's divorce, custody, and visitation agreement was finalized. Wayne was permitted to visit Max for 1 week every 3 months, on the child's birthday, on Christmas in even-numbered years, and for the month of December in odd-numbered years. Though it must be noted that Wayne never exercised those rights. And for someone who was apparently so upset that Elizabeth was taking the son away from him, it seemed like he truly didn't actually want to be part of Max's life. As part of the settlement, Wayne agreed to send child support payments of $200 a month. In late May, Elizabeth heard some strange clicks on her answering machine, which she assumed had been from Wayne calling and hanging up. The following weekend, Elizabeth and Wayne spoke for the first time in a while, and the conversation went well. Wayne told Elizabeth that he'd been in town for the weekend just gone, though Elizabeth was upset that Wayne, who had only come to Las Vegas 2 or 3 times to see his son Max since the separation, hadn't called ahead to arrange a visit for when he had been in town. It would be 5 more months before Elizabeth would learn exactly what Wayne had been doing in Las Vegas that weekend in May. It was the murder of Tina Renee Gibbs. In July, August, and September, Wayne would leave messages on Elizabeth's answering machine in which he apologized for sending his $200 check late. The checks would always come in about 2 weeks late, and Wayne had started writing, quote, the money cow in the top left-hand corner where the return address would normally go. The last time he left such a message had been in September of 1998, when his check arrived on the 28th day of the month. And in October of 1998, Elizabeth didn't receive a check at all. Now, in this case, there had been a handful of near misses that I would like to discuss with you when it comes to Wayne. The first of which is the case of Orange County Doe. On the 16th of June 1998, Wayne picked up a sex worker in Anaheim, California, who was later dubbed Orange County Doe in order to keep her identity private. She told the authorities that she'd been working at the corner of Beach and Lincoln Boulevards when she was approached by Wayne in a gas station parking lot. She said that she'd been paid $40 to sit in Wayne's truck while he masturbated. She further told the authorities that she had agreed to perform oral sex for $35. Though once she had gotten into the truck, she quickly realized that Wayne had other things in mind. Wayne told her to get into the sleeper where nobody could see them, and they both removed their clothes. Wayne told the woman to get on her hands and knees in front of him before grabbing her arms and tying them behind her back with one end of a nylon rope. He then tied the other end of the rope around her neck, after which he took another rope, pushed her knees to her chest, and bound her wrists and ankles together. Wayne told her not to struggle as it would only make things worse. He then proceeded to gag her, burn her breasts and vagina with a cigarette lighter, poke her genitals with a sharp instrument, and sit on her face. After doing so, Wayne took a break from the assault on the woman to drive around for a while before returning back to the sleeper where he raped her. Once he was done, Wayne went through the woman's purse and took all of her money. And when he dropped her off, he told her that she was lucky as the others had not survived. Now, after the events of the Orange County Doe took place, Wayne paid a visit to Scott and Linda Hayes' house on the 21st of August at about 4 p.m. Wayne stayed with them for a couple of days, during which time he managed to talk Scott out of his favorite knife, which was a hunting knife that he kept in a special case. Scott and Linda would later note that they found it weird that Wayne wouldn't let anyone near his truck until he'd cleaned it. They also noticed that Wayne drank a lot on the visit and that he didn't change his clothes or clean for 3 days. After Wayne left the Hayes' house, Scott and Linda would never hear from him again. On the 23rd of August at around 11 p.m, a 22-year-old woman known as Sonoma County Doe, who we'll call Jane Doe for this section, had been standing in front of the Monte Vista Model on Santa Rosa Avenue with a handful of other sex workers when she saw a big, shiny, and dark truck pull up. It had been Wayne driving this truck, who reached over and pushed open the passenger door, which Jane Doe took to have been an invitation to get in. Wayne proceeded to hand Jane Doe money, which she then tucked into her sock. The pair then drove around for a while, predominantly looking for a place to park his massive truck. When she realized that Wayne was struggling to find somewhere to park, Jane Doe suggested they park in the Friedman Brothers parking lot, which was large and would be empty at that time of night. And so that was where Wayne parked. He'd introduced himself to Jane Doe as Adam, his middle name. The pair proceeded to engage in sexual sexual acts, but it hadn't been working for Wayne, and so Jane Doe switched positions. Wayne told her that it would turn him on if she put her hands behind her back and grabbed her butt, and so she did, but as soon as she did so, Wayne grabbed her and bound her hands together with rope. Jane Doe had not agreed to any bondage or kinks like that, and so she started to panic, quote, "Somebody help me, why are you doing this?" Wayne subsequently ordered Jane Doe to shut up, quote, "If you scream, I'll kill you. I'll knock your teeth down your throat." Jane Doe started crying, which only made Wayne angrier, quote, shut up, I'll give you something to cry about." Wayne then proceeded to rape Jane Doe. According to Jane Doe, it happened 4 or 5 times. Afterwards, Wayne stopped his truck at the side of the freeway, walked Jane Doe down the hillside and hog-tied her, putting one of his neckties around her neck. Wayne then went through Jane Doe's purse and stole $400 in cash, then gave some of it back to her. Jane Doe couldn't remember whether it was a $20 bill or her original $100 fee for the sex, but Wayne had given it back to Jane Doe so that she could get home. Quote, "Once I set you down, don't be trying to get out of them, the ropes, real fast. I don't want you to get up off the side of the hill and see my license plates." Now, ironically, Wayne had tied the rope so loosely around Jane Doe's hands that she had already freed them by the time she'd gotten out of the truck. Jane Doe then waited until she heard Wayne pull away before she removed the rope from around her ankles and scrambled up the hillside. When Jane Doe saw that it had been safe to do so, she climbed the rest of the way to the freeway. A trucker then saw her, pulled over and drove her to the next freeway exit where she called her pimp and then dialed for 911. Jane Doe made the calls from a pay phone outside a market in Cloverdale, which was at least 200 miles up Highway 101 from the Friedman Brothers parking lot. When a Cloverdale police officer arrived, Jane Doe had still been clutching the rope and necktie. Once the officers realized that the rapes had occurred in the Sonoma County Sheriff's jurisdiction, he turned her over to a deputy who took her to Sutter Hospital. While she waited, Sheriff's Detective Dennis O'Leary from the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Unit interviewed her. Joanne Kasmer had been the nurse who examined Jane Doe, and she later said that out of the 175 rape victims that she'd seen in her career, Jane Doe had been the most severely injured of them all. Jane Doe cried, but had been cooperative throughout the 4-hour examination, which started at 5:45 a.m. She cried and held her face in her hands as she recounted the night's events to Joanne Kasmer, who took the vaginal swab that would later be matched to Wayne's DNA. The nurse made note of Jane Doe's injuries, which included bruises on her face, right breast and neck, a cut on her lip, swelling on the side of her face, linear red marks and swelling on her wrists, rope burns on her ankles, abrasions and burns to her genitals. The nurse also noted that Jane Doe had been far too sore to let the nurse complete a rectal exam. Jane Doe had also complained of wrist pain and was unable to move her bruised thumb as it had hurt too much. About a week later, Jane Doe gave a description to a sketch artist, and a couple of months later, after Wayne had handed himself in, she managed to identify him from a photo lineup. Wayne would ultimately let a handful of his victims go free, all of them with a similar tale to tell. After Wayne turned himself in on the 3rd of November 1998, he was arrested on suspicion of mayhem. The following day, on the 4th of November, he was interviewed by the detectives for hours on end. Wayne was placed in a padded cell and placed on the suicide watch due to his unstable emotional state and was prescribed medications to calm him down. It was also on the 4th of November that the story was released to the public, though it didn't reveal much detail. It must be noted that the fact that Wayne had turned himself in with a breast had been leaked to the press. Also on the 4th of November, Wayne took the police to the place where he had buried Torso Girls' legs. On the 5th of November, people that knew Wayne expressed their reactions to the news to the press, with some neighbors telling stories about Wayne that had been untrue, possibly for attention. That same day, Wayne met with a psychologist to undergo an evaluation. On the 6th of November 1998, Wayne was arraigned at Humboldt County Superior Court for 1 murder. In December of 1998, he was indicted on a single count of first-degree murder for the death of Jane Doe, with a trial being set for the following July. In June of 1999, after a lengthy investigation, Wayne was arrested on 4 counts of murder in the first degree. In October of 1999, Wayne was transferred to the West Valley Detention Center in Rancho Cucamonga. The legal process in this case would be naturally very lengthy, with the next notable event occurring in January of 2004. It was in that January that Judge Michael Smith ruled that most of Wayne's confessions were admissible in court, though any confessions that were made after the 5th of November 1998 were ruled inadmissible. On the 17th of January 2006, the jury in the trial was selected after 900 people were screened, 6 men and 6 women were selected with 6 alternates. And finally, on the 13th of March 2006, the trial against Wayne commenced. By April 12th of that same year, the prosecution finished their case, and on the 24th of April, the defense began their case. On the 15th of May 2006, Wayne underwent a psychological exam and was found to have been only slightly more psychotic than the average inmate. On the 14th of June, the prosecution delivered their closing arguments that lasted 2 hours 15 minutes, with the defense delivering their closing arguments the following day on the 15th. June 19th saw the jury, which had now been 7 women and 5 men, begin their deliberations. The jury reached their verdict on the 27th of June, they found Wayne Adam Ford guilty of 4 counts of murder in the first degree. The sentencing trial against Wayne Adam Ford then commenced on July 12th, with the jury deciding on the sentence on the 10th of August. On the 17th of October, Wayne Adam Ford was interviewed for a pre-sentence report, which he claims that he was very sorry, but he does not think he was guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, that he was guilty of 4 accidental murders. Whatever the case, in February of 2007, the judge decided that there should be no retrial, and Wayne Adam Ford's sentencing of the death penalty was upheld. He was then transported to San Quentin prison. Wayne Adam Ford remains on death row to this day. Now, something that the authorities still hadn't established had been the identity of the remains dubbed Torso Girl. Thankfully, in December of 2022, the HSCO and the California Department of Justice partnered with Othram Inc., which is a forensic genealogy lab that I've actually mentioned before on this channel, to see if advanced forensic DNA testing could help reveal the identity of the remains. Quote, "The case was determined to be eligible for advanced forensic DNA testing, and the HCSO sent Othram a DNA extract from the remains. Othram scientists used forensic genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the female. Utilizing this profile and forensic genealogy, a potential DNA match was developed for a close relative. Investigators contacted the relative, inquiring if they had any missing family members. The relative stated that their family member, Kerry, had been missing since the mid-1990s. HCSO investigators were able to track down Kerry's sister, who confirmed that Kerry's last contact with family was in 1997. Kathy provided investigators with a DNA sample, which was then compared to the DNA sample from the unknown female's remains. These DNA profiles were confirmed to be a genealogical match, officially identifying the remains as that of Kerry Ann Cummings, born in 1972. During her last contact with her family in 1997, Kerry was suffering from untreated mental illness and told family that she was couch surfing in the Eugene, Oregon area. Despite multiple offers from her family, she refused to come home. Quote, "Kerry was beautiful, funny, smart, and an artist. She was great at making us laugh," Kerry's sister Kathy Cummings told investigators. It is devastating what mental illness can do in a span of only 2 short years. Kathy told investigators that after Kerry went missing, her parents tried to report her as missing in Arizona and Oregon, and even hired a private investigator. But due to laws surrounding the reports of missing persons at that time, a missing persons report was never taken. Therefore, Kerry was never listed as a missing person or entered into any national missing persons databases. Quote, "Unfortunately, back then, they were told that Kerry was an adult, that she had chosen the lifestyle, and that if she wasn't a threat to herself or others, there was nothing that law enforcement could do. As the internet expanded, I took to searching the Nameless website when I was missing her, scanning for mention of her tattoo and searching through the pictures of the Jane Does. She was dearly loved. The Humboldt County Coroner's Division is working with family members to release Kerry's remains for burial with other deceased family members." Quote, "I'd like to thank the California Department of Justice DNA Lab and Othram for once again providing outstanding work and assistance in solving this case," Sheriff William Honsel said. "While we can't take away the pain of loss, we can hope that this identification can help bring closure to Kerry's family and the community. I'm thankful for the dedication of our investigators who never gave up on Kerry and continue to seek resolution for the outstanding cases that remain to be solved. It's unknown just how many victims Wayne had, but we can only hope that the family and friends of the 4 victims identified have felt justice has been served." Those victims were 25-year-old Kerry Ann Cummings, 26-year-old Tina Renee Gibbs, 25-year-old Lynette Deam White, 29-year-old Patricia Ann Tamas. And that's everything that I have for you in this mammoth of a case. Thank you so much for watching this multi-part series. I really appreciate it. I'll be uploading the full, complete version very, very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. If you have a case that you want me to cover on this channel, go to requestacase.com and send in your case submissions there. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more true crime videos just like this one, and hit that bell icon so you can be notified every single time I post a brand new true crime video. And with all that being said, I will see you in the next case. And Fred also says bye too. Hello, little one.